It's the William Hill Sports Book Club, and on this episode we're reading a new biography of Sir Alf Ramsey, the man who led England to World Cup glory in 1966.
Each chapter I researched, I thought, he's getting even more incredible. There's more and more about Alf that is unseen. He really should be a 21st century hero.
The book is full of in-depth research and full of new revelations.
People were heavily persecuted for homosexual behaviour. Now, we don't know Ted Phillips's personal background from then, but he admitted in court. He pleaded guilty. He was 21 years old. He went out on loan. He came back because Alf said, "This guy is an amazing footballer."
In a World Cup year, time to take a fresh look at the only man to win it for England, the Unseen Sir Alf. A different kind of hero is the book we're looking at on the William Hill Sports Book Club. Hi there, I'm Adrian Durham. This is the William Hill Sports Book Club, where we look at books that could be contenders for the coveted William Hill Sports Book Award towards the end of the year. As ever, I'm joined by a William Hill book reader, a man who reads books in his sleep, Neil Foggin. Foggin, you okay?
Very well, yourself?
I'm all right. Read any books lately?
A few.
A few?
A few.
A few hundred.
A few. Away from sport at the moment. We're having a little bit of a rest from sport at the moment.
Yeah, I've read a few away from sport, which is refreshing, but back on the sport now. And we have to be back on the sport. Our guest on this episode is Grant Bage, who has written The Unseen Sir Alf, a different kind of hero. Grant, congratulations on the book. It's the cover, the inside back cover says it took 5 years to research, and 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I came across actually was 6 years ago that really kind of changed my view of Alf, and thought, just a minute, everybody before seems to have perhaps got him a bit wrong. So yeah, it's been a long time in the making. Not full time really the last 3 years, but yeah. And the more I dug, the kind of more I found that people had not seen who he really was.
Yeah, what's interesting about that is, and I've done a few autobiographies, ghostwritten them as well, that you dig deep and you can keep on digging, and there's more to dig. How did you know when to stop?
My wife would probably say that I don't know when to stop. And I'm kind of still, I'm never going to stop, if you like. But I've worked my way through, and I've really taken him from his family before birth and his life growing up, and I feel that I've discovered enough now that I can give a clear picture of who he was. But it's never going to be 100%, partly because that's the way, as you know, with historical biographies, but also because of who he was. He was a very shy, reserved, reticent man. So he hasn't left too many direct records explaining his life. It's been a lot of digging.
So there have been a lot of biographies of Sir Alf, so we were wondering why another one now?
Well, I mean, the first one was in 1970, just after the Mexico World Cup. And then the last two were in kind of 1999 and 2006, and they were really, really good. So 2006, it's 20 years ago really since the last one. And I found out some things about Alf that surprised me a lot, and that really made me rethink totally the person that had been presented to me, both by himself and in previous biographies. And do you want me to tell you about that?
Well, there's a Ted Phillips story that we are definitely getting onto a little bit later on. We'll save that one.
Yeah.
I'm interested for the time being in the motivation behind it, the time it took, the research as well. You talk on page 58 about, quote, the time-consuming, sometimes frustrating slog of researching Ramsay's family background. So let's start there, because the family background is really, really interesting. And this is new stuff that you brought to the table, stuff that's not been in previous biographies, not in so much detail anyway. Why was it frustrating, the slog of doing that research?
Because he almost deliberately didn't leave behind any autobiographical records beyond 1952. He wrote this autobiography in 1952, really just as his playing career was peaking. He was kind of 32. And it's like most 1950s autobiographies in that it's actually ghost written, or you can tell there's a ghost writer. And it's sort of revealing, but it isn't. And then it stops there. He's very wary of the press. And so he gives, in 1970 and 1972, to a series of kind of autobiographical interviews, but otherwise he just kept people at arm's length. So one of the reasons for that was a childhood nickname that was sort of acknowledged in the previous books, in 2 of the 3 biographies, but was never really gone into properly, and that's where I started. Because that childhood nickname, which was quite surprising for me, was a racist nickname. So it alluded to the kind of darker tone of his skin when he was young. It rhymes with malarkey. It's the D word. It's, you know, it's a heinous, racist term. And when I first read in one of the books that was his childhood nickname from the 20s and 30s, I kind of thought, that's a bit weird. He kind of looks like, he always presented to me as an old white guy, you know. And the autobiographies suggested, well, it's because he had really kind of dark hair that he was given this nickname, the D word. But actually, when I started looking at his family background, and also at some of the other kind of less public things, he was also rumoured to come from a gypsy Roma traveller family. So he was rumoured as a gypsy, and he had a racist nickname that alluded to his darker skin tone. That got me really interested. So I started looking at his family. And I was kind of hoping, actually secretly, that these would all be Romanists living in caravans, because that would make it really easy. And they're not, actually. Some of them are travellers. Some of them do live in caravans, but many live in houses. And they all make their living out of kind of selling food and foodstuffs. And his dad and his granddad were hay and straw dealers. So they had lots of vans, they had lots of carts, they had lots of horses. They travelled all round buying up farmers' hay and straw and brought it back and then sold it on in London. So they came from a really travelling, dealing background. And I think some of them lived in caravans, but some didn't.
Yeah, in the book you refer to it as GRT, Gypsy Roma Traveller. And you were thinking there's a lot on this in the early chapters, weren't you?
Yeah, I'm born in the 70s, so I don't really know much about Alf. And then to get that background, but it's a level of detail that we go into on those opening chapters, that part 1 of the book. And I found it fascinating because it was, to me, we always have this argument when we're reading books, is it a sports book? Yes, it is a sports book. This book is more than a sports book because it takes you back into time and tells you about that period. It gives you political views, etc. And I found it fascinating, those opening chapters.
Yeah, and I think as well, Grant, and you're right, it is more than a sports book, but you can actually, and you do this very well in the book, kind of tie it in with what Gareth Southgate was doing with his Dear England letter. Yeah. And it opens up a whole new focus of analysis on Sir Alf Ramsey as not that white guy we all thought he was, but somebody very different to that.
Yeah, and what's really interesting for me is that both Jimmy Greaves and Bobby Moore are kind of on record as teasing Alf, either about his nickname or about these rumours that he basically came from a gypsy family.
There was one from Bobby Moore you bring up in the early 70s, wasn't it?
Absolutely amazing. So they're on, it's 1973, and they're on a team bus with England, and they're going through Czechoslovakia. Now, it's a team bus, so it's got all the players, and it's got all the coaching staff, but it's also got all the top journalists, because in those days, the journalists travelled with the team. They're going down this road, and there's a convoy of horse-drawn Romany gypsy vans. And as they manoeuvre past it, Bobby Moore calls out, "Hey, Alf, look, there's all your family over there." And Alf goes absolutely crimson with fury. Now, the only reason that we know about this is because of Leo McKinstry's brilliant biography from 2006-07. And the only reason that it's in there is because Nigel Clark, who was the Mirror journalist who helped Alf write some of his columns in the 70s and 80s, was there and witnessed it. He told Leo McKinstry about it, and Leo McKinstry included it in his book. But nobody else has really done the hard yards from those early years about looking, well, what was his family? How did they get that rumour attached to them? How did he get his nickname? And what did it mean to come from a gypsy Romany, as I said then, because that's a historic term, Romany traveller family? Well, it meant a lot of prejudice. I mean, the prejudice now against GRT people is massive, and it was even stronger then. So Alf is coming from a really disadvantaged background. He's got a kind of racist nickname hung around his neck from the 20s and 30s, and he's trying to make his way in football.
And I think that a lot of people reading the book, this will be new information for them for the first time, because the previous autobiography was so long ago. There's another little bit in there that stops you in your tracks. Sir Alf Ramsey had a great uncle who probably murdered a policeman by slitting his throat. I mean, none of us knew this stuff.
I mean, this is absolutely amazing. And he was James Ramsay. I mean, he really was a great uncle. And
he was infamous, wasn't he?
Well, yeah. I mean, certainly locally, and it was reported in all the national newspapers. So basically, he had a threshing machine, which was a piece of farm equipment that you took to go and kind of process the crops. And his threshing machine moved around different farms. And in 1893, there was a burglary where he had his threshing machine at. And the local policeman stopped the burglars coming out with kind of sacks of grain. And they beat him up, and they cut his throat, and they rolled him into a ditch. And this is absolutely brutal. And it was James Ramsay having his threshing machine there that helped them work out who these people were. 4 of them were arrested, James and his 15-year-old son. 3 of them were tried, and 2 of them were found guilty. Now, there were 2 brothers were found guilty. One was sentenced to hang, one was given life imprisonment. James Ramsay was acquitted of the murder. But they immediately rearrested him and said, just a minute, there's something wrong here. They arrested him for the burglary, and the judge who heard the burglary trial a few months after the murder trial said, you were there. We can't tell whether or not you murdered James Ramsay, but you were there, you were involved with it. You've got 14 years for the burglary.
Cool.
And the judge's comments made it quite clear that he thought that James had been an active part of the murder. And the guy who was pardoned said he was the one who cut his throat. So nobody knows. Anyway, he comes out of prison a few years early and he moves to Barking. And 13 years later, Alf Ramsey's born in Dagenham. So the family kind of keep together, and James Ramsay lives in Barking, just round the corner from Bobby Moore's family.
Amazing. That geography is absolutely incredible. We've talked about his early days, his childhood, the GRT background of Alf Ramsey. There is an idea that he went on to have elocution lessons. You blow that up. We don't need to go into great detail. People need to read the book, but you kind of blow that apart in the book. But descriptions of Sir Alf dotted throughout the book that are ascribed to him by others, i.e. you quote them, painfully shy, football obsessive, difficult, rude, cold dignity that he had, emotional frigidity, distant, aloof. And referenced throughout the book is the possibility that Sir Alf might be undiagnosed neurodivergence. And you go into great detail on this. This isn't just, he might be. I mean, you've gone into some serious detail here.
I'm not a psychologist. I can't medically diagnose or psychologically diagnose Alf Ramsey as neurodivergent. But the more I looked at what the people around him were saying about how he was, after a couple of years of looking at it, I suddenly thought, just a minute, I think I may have got the key to unlocking why all these people say, he's so aloof, he's so cold, he never really lets anybody in. Because he absolutely loved his players, but they were the only people, and his wife and his stepdaughter, they were the only people in the world who he seemed to love. He kept everyone else at a real distance, and he was absolutely obsessive about football. He could talk for hours about football with anybody. His Ipswich players got so fed up with him talking about football that coming back from an away game, they'd try not to sit in the carriage with him because all he wanted to talk about was football. That was his total life. And I think, he was obsessive about it, and he had an amazing memory as well, a photographic memory for moves in football games. And not just from last week, which you and I might remember. He had it from last month, last season, from 10 years ago.
There was the story on the golf course where he bumps into an ex-footballer, and he'd picked him for the under-21s over a decade before that. Yeah. Not only did he remember that he'd picked him, he remembered the other 10 players in the team as well.
Yeah, he had an absolutely extraordinary memory that can be associated with neurodivergence. And my real take on it is that if he was neurodivergent, and I do think he was, but we can never be sure, I think it made him. I think it really gave him the qualities and skills that gave him an edge over other players and other managers, because he had an amazing backstory as a player to, the obstacles he had to overcome to become a professional footballer in the first place. So that kind of burning desire, that incredible passion for football, the focus, relentless.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that when we have not just biographies, but biographies where the subject matter has been done many times before, we're looking for something new, as something new emerged, and this is definitely...
Yeah, and this book is full of that. And when you talk about the neurodiverse section, I've just recently been diagnosed. So when I'm reading that, I'm like, wow, they are traits. Because I can see it in myself, and I'm looking and going, yeah, and that's why you are told that you can be obsessive about a certain subject. So his subject was football, he was obsessive, and he will have remembered everything, and you remember all the details. And I found it fascinating, but this book doesn't just tell you one thing. It's like it's one after one after, it just keeps going, doesn't it?
I know that your obsessive subject is not football.
I know.
Okay, I'm just putting it out there.
That's why you're here.
There's several revelations in there. I think the big one is the Ted Phillips revelation, which I found absolutely extraordinary. I had to reread chapter 9 because it's stunning. The whole chapter's stunning, right? It's a story I've never heard before. I've never seen it before anywhere. A story very relevant to today, actually, in the modern game. The stunning revelations about Ted Phillips, who was one of Sir Alf's key players, the goal scorer. I mean, goal machine for Ipswich when they went from Division 3, what is now League 1, through Championship, and won the title in the top flight Premier League. And I'm going to read this quote from the book, and it just about says it all. So the quote is this, it's something you've written, Grant. Did Ted Phillips, prosecuted for homosexual behaviour in 1955, provide a crucial assist to England winning the World Cup in 1966? And we need to put this into historical context because homosexuality back in the 50s and after that was illegal. And yet here you've got a footballer who had great success under the future England manager who would win the World Cup, and he's been prosecuted for homosexual behaviour. This is an incredible find from your research.
I mean, and it was that find, literally, six and a bit years ago, that really kind of removed the motes from my eyes about Alf Ramsey, because I'd always thought he was this conservative figure, that he was, very formal, very conservative, really kind of quite repressed. And it was actually my birthday, and I wanted a day out. I was having a bit of a rough time at work, and my wife said, "Where would you like to go?" I said, "I'd like to go to the archives at Ipswich. I love rooting around in archives." And I went there, and there's the records of Ipswich Town, and it was the day that Alf was appointed. It's the director's minutes, and it's the 8th of August, 1955, and they're interviewing Alf for his job, and there's a little note in the side margins that said, "Oh, young player Edward Phillips going to be in court." And I kind of read on, and he was pleaded guilty to homosexual behaviour about 6 weeks later in court, and was actually had his contract terminated by the club. And as I read through these records, he goes on loan for 9 months, but they retain his registration, and Alf argues to bring him back. This is extraordinary, because it's 1955. I mean, it's only a year before that Turing took his own life after being convicted, and people were heavily persecuted for homosexual behaviour. Now, we don't know Ted Phillips's personal background from then, but he admitted in court. He pleaded guilty. He was 21 years old. He went out on loan. He came back because Alf said, "This guy is an amazing footballer." Alf brought him back in at the start of the season, and some of the directors of the club were going, "Oh, not quite sure. You want to pay him the same wages as everyone else. We're really not sure." And he starts banging in the goals, and he scores 41 goals that season in the league, 5 more in the Cups. Ipswich win the 3rd Division South on goal average. Ted Phillips' 41 goals clinched that Third Division South Championship. And from then on, his career started to really kind of take off. And he always said, he was really upset at Alf's funeral in 1999. He said, Alf made me. And he really did. And if Alf hadn't done that kind of redeeming saving of Ted's career, and I should add that Ted went on to be very happily married, but 99 managers out of 100 at that time in the 1950s would have put him on the scrap heap. But Alf and Ipswich didn't. And Ted, as you know from the book, scored 27 and 31 goals when they won the Division 2 and Division 1, the equivalent of the Championship and the Premiership. There's no way that Alf would have become England manager had England not won the First Division. Had Ipswich not won the First Division, there's no way that Ipswich would have won the First Division without Ted Phillips' goals. So there's a beautiful circular story of redemption there.
There is, and it is moving. You talk about Ted Phillips being unable to speak at the memorial service because it meant, and he said, Alf meant so much to me, he was unique. Those are special words from him. And if you think, Foggy, I think there's stuff in the book about how the rest of the players must have known, but accepted Ted Phillips because he scored all these goals, because he was a good footballer, and you also say because he was a good man as well. And I'm thinking to myself, how has football not moved on from this in 70 years since then? It's incredible, really.
It's mental, isn't it? It's mental that we still talk about this subject, and it's just, yeah. Maybe it comes in the next few years.
Well, I think with this revelation, the fact that the guy who went on to manage England to World Cup glory was so accepting and so insistent that he wanted Ted Phillips in his team, surely that's got to mean something. That's got to reverberate around the modern generation when this information really gets out there.
I really hope so. It is over 6 years since I found that story. And when I first found it, I thought, this for me, it changes the world. But then I thought, actually, we don't really know what was going on in Ted's life at that time. What it really changes is my view of Alf Ramsey, because Alf Ramsey saved him, and then together they changed the world. So I came across this and I sat on it. I didn't tell anybody. What I had to do, because it changed my view of Alf Ramsey, was I then had to go and fill in all the other 14 chapters. And each chapter I researched, I thought, he's getting even more incredible. There's more and more about Alf that is unseen. He really should be a 21st century hero. I mean, he was a 20th century hero, but in a very stuffy way. He's an amazing figure, and the Ted Phillips story really transformed my worldview. And I hope it really does something about opening the door in football.
Yeah, I think it should, absolutely. It's a brilliant find. When you say you sat on it for 6 years, was part of you, and I'm talking about the methodology here, was part of you worried in case somebody else unearthed it and got it out there?
A bit, but I was more worried about them getting it out there in the wrong way. Because for me, this story is about Alf. It's about Alf Ramsey looking at what's important in somebody. It's about Ted's stoicism. It's about him working hard, turning his life around, that relationship between him and Alf, and also with the rest of the squad. Because, yes, it was Alf who led that decision-making, but it was a decision by the club as a whole. And John Cobbold was the chair of Ipswich from 1957 onwards and was really active. John Cobbold is generally thought of as being gay. He never married, and he's thought of as being gay historically. So I think it was Alf, it was probably a bit of John, and it was that kind of Ipswich culture. So there's something really interesting there about, it can't be one person's decision. Everyone must have known. I mean, it was a small story in the papers, so it was publicly known, and I've looked at the court records as well, obviously. But a small story in a 1950s newspaper is still a story. People read them back to back, page to page. So it must have been known, but nobody talked about it.
Yeah, and there were a lot of court cases. A lot of men were prosecuted for this. So there was a lot of stories, and hence it was a small piece rather than a big piece.
I think that the Cobbolds, because they were very powerful locally, managed to probably, lean on a few people and say, just, make it a small story. But it was 300 words, and it was in the local evening paper. So it's not like it was totally hidden or disguised. It was there. But people chose to set it aside and to see Ted for what he could do. And what's really interesting, Ted Phillips got injured at the end of the 1950s. And John Arlott, the famous kind of cricket writer and commentator, there's this wonderful article in The Observer in 1961. He says, Alf saves. You know, he saves kind of players who are on the scrap heap. He didn't know about the Ted Phillips story. He says he saved loads of other players. He said he's been waiting for 2 years for Ted Phillips to get back into full fitness. And look, here he is now in the second division, in the first division. He's starting to score all these goals. And of course, they went on that season to win the league. And John Arlott said Alf's waited for 2 years for Ted Phillips to get back to full fitness.
Amazing. It's a great story. And one thing very briefly that I love about it is that you've spent that time looking at it from Ted Phillips' point of view. And you've said that, listen, it could have been that he was groomed from a very young age. So that's another part of this. It's an important thing to include. We may never know the full story, but there's some evidence that that is possibly the case.
Yeah, and one of the reasons I sat on the story for 6 years until it's come out in this book, and this is the first time it's been in the public domain, one of the reasons I sat on it is I wanted to do it well. I really wanted Ted Phillips's bit of the story to be told well, because it could so easily have been sensationalised or oversimplified, and I don't think it needs to be. It speaks for itself. And yeah.
I love football content in football books. Who doesn't? And this one delivers. Ramsay was the Mikel Arteta of the 50s and 60s. One of his players is quoted in the book, Alf practiced throw-ins and corners. We'd never done that before. We scored 10 goals off corners that season. Arteta's up to 20 as we speak, by the way, so he's taking it on a little bit. And Ted Phillips himself on page 200, Alf could think up free kick routines in his sleep. It's a great quote, brilliant quote. Alf got the England job. Well, let's talk about 66, because obviously it's huge. He got the England job, but Billy Wright, who everybody has heard of, who's in football, and Jimmy Adamson, who didn't get on with Alf, were close to getting it. Is that right? Or probably people felt they should have got it. Alf publicly said England can win the World Cup, and it felt to me, from reading, I might be wrong, felt to me that was one of the things that led to him getting the job.
I think it was. I mean, firstly, Billy Wright, he accepted the Arsenal job in kind of March 1962. And everyone thought, well, Billy Wright, because he managed the under-21s, and everyone thought he was going to get the full England job. And he decided to go to Arsenal. Didn't work out, actually. Didn't really work out very well for Billy Wright at all. So that was kind of one person who they thought was going to get the job. And then Jimmy Adamson, this is a really strange story. So he never won an England full cap, but Walter Winterbottom chose to take him to the 1962 Chile World Cup as coach. And then it's kind of in the FA minutes that he got offered the job. This is all before Alf Ramsey was appointed. So there was lots of FA politics and infighting going on that Alf had nothing to do with. Alf never applied for the England job. So the man who won, the only person who's won a World Cup for English football, never applied for the job in which he got it.
Amazing.
Absolutely incredible. So they had a public round of applications. They had about 60 applications. There was nobody suitable. This was kind of in August. And so they decided to start asking people. And they asked Jimmy Adamson. But before they'd asked people in the September, before they'd formally reopened the process, there were 2 interviews in the Daily Mail. One was with Mercer, Joe Mercer, and the other was with Alf Ramsey. And these were obviously the people who were in the frame. They hadn't applied for it first time round, but they were in the frame. They were in-depth interviews, really in-depth, long question and answer, and asking them basically the same questions. And in there, in September 1962, he hasn't applied for the job. He hasn't got the job. We don't know who's going to be in the job. In there, Alf says, I think we can win the World Cup. And that statement, I think, helped him to get the job. But it wasn't an idle boast. We know from all sorts of sources that he genuinely thought England would win the World Cup. And with that kind of calculating, cool, click, 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 perhaps slightly neurodivergent brain, he'd looked at the odds and he really thought, we were at home, there'll be home climate, home pitches, home food, we can win the World Cup. He said it, Then they interviewed him. Then they offered him the job about 6 weeks later, and he kept on saying it.
And they did it.
And they did it amazingly.
But England under Alf Ramsey were rubbish at the start. Got battered by France in his first game, 5-2.
Absolutely.
Lost to Scotland as well. Let me read you some of the headlines. In 1965, this is less than a year before England win the World Cup. Here's a couple of headlines that you put in the book. Unforgivable Alf. England get slow hand clap and jeers. And as you write on page 230, it's the start of chapter 12, this. Until the 66 tournament kicked off, Alf was the most abused man in England.
Yeah. The press really hated him. 99% of journalists really did not like Alf. And he'd had a very prickly relationship with them all the way through. So whenever anything went wrong, I mean, a bit like nowadays, you know, the media will be on a manager's back, especially a national manager's back, straight away.
We think it's a modern thing, but it really isn't, is it?
It really, really isn't. And Alf deliberately kept the press at arm's length, partly because of the stuff we've talked about with his kind of childhood nickname, for all sorts of other reasons too. He didn't trust them. So they were just waiting for something to go wrong. Now, his players loved him, and he loved his players. This was the closest bond, apart from his wife and close family, in his life. He always stuck up for his players. So they thought, well, yeah, actually, if Alf thinks we can win the World Cup, we can. But really, nobody else did. And part of that was him not revealing his hand and not picking his final team, really until the last 12, 9, 6, 3 months into the... You know, he kept his cards very close to his chest. And that was part of his strategic brilliance. He didn't show the rest of the world how England were going to play.
When you say his players loved him, they clearly did. But he could also have a go at them. The Gordon Banks example is great here, where I think it's his second game. He has a really bad game.
Yeah.
And Alf waits until the game is over and everything's done and then just goes for him, has a right pop at him. But actually, in a way that is constructive, gets Gordon Banks to have a look at himself, makes him better, makes him the world-class goalkeeper he went on to become.
Exactly. And what he models is the reason he was so cross with Gordon Banks was because before the game, he'd said, look, there's this Brazilian player, does absolutely fantastic free kicks. So watch out. I want you to prepare in these ways for those free kicks. So Gordon Banks says, yes, boss. 20 minutes in, Brazilian player gets a free kick, knocks it straight past Banks in exactly the way that Alf Ramsey has cautioned Banks to be prepared for. So as you say, Alf doesn't say anything at half-time, then absolutely has a really concerted go at Gordon Banks. Now, part of that is to help to make Gordon the world-class keeper that he became, but also it's to model to the other players, if I say something to you, if I ask you to do a particular tactical job, you do it or you won't be in my team. And we know that a lot of that goes back to 1950 and 1953 when Alf was a player. They lost to the USA in the World Cup 1-0. They lost to Hungary at Wembley 6-3, the first time they'd ever lost on home soil. These scarred Alf in the same way that Gareth Southgate might have been scarred by missing a penalty. So he wanted his players to listen to him, and if they didn't, they were out.
Yeah, I mean, I think the book is actually a celebration of Alf Ramsey and all those positive, glorious things that led to the World Cup final itself. And tactically, you're right, you know, he didn't show his hand. The wingless wonders is the phrase attached to him. But there was a game in Spain that England won, but that was relatively close to the World Cup itself, wasn't it?
It was December 1965. And he then, after, because they basically played 4-3-3 with a very fluid, the front six players were incredibly fluid. And, they didn't have a conventional wingers and they didn't have, if you like, a conventional centre forward to nod them in when the wingers crossed them. But he then didn't make a big fuss about this amazing performance and was seen to pick wingers in other games afterwards in preparation for the World Cup and even during the World Cup itself. So he really was the master of disguise in that way. He was also incredibly pragmatic. So, the whole kind of Greaves-Hurst, should Greaves have been picked? He didn't make that decision until during the World Cup itself.
And by the way, he got it spectacularly right.
Got it spectacularly right. And of course, Martin Peters and Geoff Hurst had a basically under 20 caps between them. When they scored all 4 goals in the World Cup final, they'd only been capped, 7, 8, 9 months beforehand. So Alf could be very flexible, but he required his players always to follow his orders.
I've watched the 66 World Cup final numerous times, studied it endlessly. And one of the things that I've not really seen many people pick up on is that there's a moment in it, in the first half, I think it is, when Bobby Moore ends up on the left wing. Now, this is a centre-back, and he ends up in a left-wing position. And it immediately struck me, because he was such a good footballer, on the ball, such a good footballer. I don't think people understand just how good Bobby Moore was on the ball. But it struck me that, hang on, people called this team the Wingless Wonders. There's Bobby Moore, a centre-back, on the wing. But, I didn't see Alf Ramsey on the touchline screaming at him to get back in position. So there was a pragmatism, but also an allowance for certain players to express themselves if the moment dictated it.
Yeah, Alf didn't give his players incredibly detailed instructions. He briefed them about the opposition. He told them how he wanted to play, but he then said, well, go out and play your game. And that gave people like Bobby Moore the brief. Bobby Moore, for the first and the fourth goals, they're immaculate passes from Moore to Hurst.
The ball for the 4th goal. Calm head at that time of the game. Wow.
So I've been talking to a very good friend, Grant Phillips, whose dad was the manager at Eton Manor, which is something we haven't talked about in the 1950s. And, he's pointed out to me just how much Bobby Moore and Geoff Hurst's relationship on the pitch was enabled by Alf Ramsey. And, you could say that West Ham did win that World Cup. They
do say that.
They do say. They say it they say little else in East London, and I don't blame them because it was spectacular. But it was enabled by the team that Alf picked and the fact that he gave those players enough of a briefing so that they knew what to do. But he never confused them with really detailed minute-by-minute instructions. He said, go and play your game now. You know what I want you to do. You know how I want you to play it. You're here because you're great. Go and express yourself.
Very quickly, he's wound me up with this book, by the way, because there's a moment in the 66 World Cup final chapter where you question whether it was a whole World Cup. I'm getting wound up just reading this. You reference West Germany not being the whole of Germany. Oh, come on now. What can England do about the politics and of the situation? And also, and a better point, I think, was about Ghana being brilliant at that time, double AFCON winners, but Africa boycotting the tournament because of a lack of continental representation. I would throw at you, Grant, very quickly here. Wales didn't qualify properly in 1958. It took a lot of dropouts and all that sort of stuff for them to go. They're not going to forget that they got to the quarterfinals. England didn't enter before 1950, so the ones before 50 don't count. Johan Cruyff had death threats, didn't go to World Cup 78. Holland lost the final, so that one doesn't count. George Best wasn't selected by the Northern Ireland boss Billy Bingham in 1982, so that one doesn't count. We could go through them all and say this is why they don't count, right?
Oh, of course. I was a bit tongue-in-cheek about it, not being a whole World Cup. And I think the point, Alf would say, Grant, we just beat the teams in front of us. That's all we had to do. And, of course, he's absolutely right. But I wanted to make the point, and it's delicious that, Ghana are going to be playing England in 2026.
Yeah.
Because they weren't allowed to in 1966.
And by the way, they were great at that time.
They were absolutely amazing. And it was really just that point I wanted to make. And of course, people say it was easy because England were at home. No, it's not easy because England are at home. Okay, there's only 16, there's only that many teams that are there, 16 teams. There's hundreds, I've got so many now. But they were the best teams from most continents in the world, apart from Africa. And
Chapter 15 is beautiful, the start of it. It's your own personal story. You've alluded to some of it already. I found the personal touch in this book, particularly the start of chapter 15, Foggy. We were talking about it this morning. Yeah. It really hits the heart, doesn't it? I love it.
Yeah, it's emotional.
Yeah.
This book is full of research and a lot of hard work's gone into it. But then we're seeing emotion in that last chapter. The last chapter is beautiful. And it's just the way it finishes. And I didn't know how the book was going to finish. But then when you read chapter 50, you go, that's the way this book should finish.
Yeah, you get it absolutely bang on. Was it a hard one to write that and hit the spot with what you wanted to do?
Thank you so much for, well, number one, for reading it really well, and number two, because that chapter means a lot to me. And so I can tell that you've read it, and actually, thank you for liking it. And do you know, by then it wrote itself. And I was aware that one of the reasons that I've kind of, this is going to sound really crazy, one of the reasons I've kind of fallen in love with Alf is that I suppose it's like your dad, you know? I mean, my dad was born in 1925, Alf was born in 1920. They both went through the war. And, you know, my dad died in 2015. And researching Alf is a bit like trying to work out and come to terms with your own childhood, your upbringing, your family. So there's kind of all of that element. And then there's all of like, well, who are we now? I mean, I'm a really kind of proud, my dad was actually half Scottish. I'm a really proud English and British person. I think patriotism is quite important, but it doesn't have to be that kind of horrible, sometimes it turns out, you know, aggressive flag-waving patriotism. I'm like for soft civic patriotism that's inclusive. And that's the England I love. And I think that's the England that Alf loved and that he tried to do his best for. And he only ever picked people who he thought would do their best in his team, who were totally committed to it, would be utterly professional, and also not sort of showy, mouthy, patriotic, but who did it because they wanted to do the best for their country by doing their job to the best of their ability. And I'm not a sports journalist. I mean, I've been in education all my life. The only other book about football that I've ever written was for 9-year-olds. You know, so doing something because you love it, I think, is really important. Alf loved football, and he wanted people to do it really, really well because they were proud to do it for their club and their country. I kind of love history, and that's how I finished up writing this book. And I hope that kind of shows through, but I hope also it's got a hard edge to it. We need to reclaim patriotism from some bad actors who are trying to take it over.
I think that's spot on. I mean, and you've already alluded to, you know, similarities with Gareth Southgate. You know, the playing careers, you know, ended up with sort of England heroic failure, if you like. But there's so many more similarities. The biggest one that never was that Gareth didn't actually go on and win something. He came that close, but didn't. But you say on page 114 that Alf Ramsey loved his job and his country. And I sensed the same when Gareth was in charge. For most of the time, he loved the job. When he was having, you know, a plastic beer glass thrown at him and being told he was going to be sacked in the morning, he didn't enjoy that part of the job. And I think that's what, you know, led to him leaving the job in the end. But and Alf Ramsey had a similar, you know, experience of getting criticism, as we've alluded to. But the patriotism thing, you know, the English identity thing is really interesting because Gareth Southgate actually put it out there in a big letter, the Dear England letter that we all remember, that's gone on to be the stage play, etc. But this was stuff that Alf was kind of quietly doing at the same time, was it? You know, in a similar way back then.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, people look at the 1966 team. It's before the Windrush generation had come through and kind of other, you know, migrant groups, before they'd had the chance to work their way through. There'd always been kind of black footballers, brown-skinned footballers, people from different cultures and nations in the English League. But the English national team that in 1966 was 11 white faces. But the manager lived with a racist nickname from his childhood. He did have a darker skin tone when he was young. So you've got this apparently white English team winning 1966, but that thread of diversity is there with Alf. And in just the same way that Gareth made that explicit with his Dear England letter, Alf just lived it. And some of his own players teased him about that supposed background. Jimmy Greaves wrote about Alf's D-word nickname 7 years before Alf died. So Jimmy Greaves, Bobby Moore, other players, they knew about his nickname, they knew about the rumours, and Alf decided that he would never talk about that. But he did face it. Gareth talked about it in a way that is still pretty inspirational, I think, that Dear England letter. Alf because it was the 1960s and because he was Alf, got on with it. But both really, I think, to the same end. If you're good enough for England, you play whatever.
Yeah, and I think that there's, I think it's an important thing that you've done here. As well as that, you've highlighted various quotes that came up. Some of them are misquotes, but you've actually gone back and researched them properly to say, yes, that was said, or no, that wasn't said. So, for example, one of the big ones was the team talk, I think at the start of extra time, when he says, you've won it once, now go and win it again. And there's been various people who said that, hang on, that didn't happen. But actually, you found enough evidence to, as much as you can, prove that yes, it did. It was said by Sir Alf Ramsey.
Yeah, one of the high spots of my kind of quite little life, because I mean, you're used to interviewing famous people. You have people sitting in this chair who've been professional sports people, who've been journalists, being paid to go around the world and talk to footballers. Well, one of the high spots of my life was Geoff Hurst talking to me for 40 minutes. Sir Geoff, free of charge, talked to me for 40 minutes on a mobile phone. And he said, because I did ask him, said, look, there's kind of lots of versions about what happened at extra time. And he said, those were the words that Alf spoke. And I think that the reason Alf spoke them was because Alf was never rhetorical. He always just told the truth. And the truth was, blimey, West Germany equalised with a few seconds to go. So, if the ref watch had been a bit quicker, we'd have won the World Cup already. Now, you've done it once, go and do it again. And he didn't complicate things. He had that slightly kind of different take on the world. I think he was neurodivergent. He just said it as it was. Those were the facts.
And I think another quote that, and it's important as we get back to the Southgate thing, the reason why I brought it up was because in the '66 World Cup, the game with Argentina was horrible, basically. It wasn't great at all. And Alf had this quote attributed to him that he called the Argentinians animals. Now, you've gone back and found the actual quote, and he doesn't say, Argentinians are animals. He says it in a totally different way, but the headlines didn't make good reading.
No, so the headlines are, Alf says, Argentinians are animals. The actual quote says, we will play our best football, England will play our best football, when we play against a team who don't come out and behave as animals.
Which is very different.
It is very different, because it's not labelling. Alf was used to labels. He'd lived with a label the whole of his life.
And this is why the GRT thing is important, because you can't label him a racist. He's a man of his time, and there were things done and said that we would never do and say now because we're more enlightened, if you like, or we should be more enlightened. But you can't accuse Alf Ramsey of racism given his background, surely.
I don't think you can, but you always do have to look at the evidence. And the evidence is that he didn't just say, those Argentinians are animals. He said, well, we'll do better when we don't have to play against a team that behaves like animals. Now, he was alluding to the Argentinians because that quote was at the end of the game against Argentina. But what most people don't realise is this. Everyone sees the fact that the captain was sent off. Everyone can read the stats about the game and see how many fouls there were. And it was a filthy game. Geoff Hurst told me it was the dirtiest game he'd ever played in. And I mean,
Played in a lot of games.
He's a seasoned pro. I mean, it was filthy. So what was on the pitch was obvious. What people don't realise is that Alf Ramsey was interviewed after seeing what happened off the pitch. So the whistle blew, England had won 1-0, Martin Peters had crossed it, Geoff Hurst had nodded it in. They went off the pitch, down the Wembley Tunnel. In the Wembley Tunnel, and as the Argentine team was going off the pitch, they assaulted a FIFA official, they urinated in the Wembley Tunnel, they then banged on the England dressing room door for about 10 or 15 minutes to try and get the England players to come out for a fight. Now, there's lots of good after-dinner stories about, Nobby Stiles saying, come on in, but obviously no one went out. And Alf Ramsey's interview almost certainly was after witnessing that behaviour as well as what happened on the pitch. So he was furious, quite rightly. And so was FIFA, so was the FA, so was anyone who saw it. But 99.9% of the public did not see it because this all happened in the tunnel. They'd seen what happened on the pitch. They'd seen it was a really difficult game. They didn't see what happened behind the scenes. And I think it was that Alf was responding to.
Two very quick ones. What's your big question?
Are we going to stick to sports books? What's the next project?
Well, do you know, I'm going to have to get permission from my wife about the next project, I think. I mean, I alluded to the fact that the only other sports book I've written was for 9-year-olds, and it was called The Story of Football. It was like a classroom resource. It was only 48 pages long. I kind of would love to do a young person's history of football written for young people, but there's other biographies I'd also quite like to do.
And very quickly, Alf Ramsey, how would you, in a sentence, how would you like him to be remembered?
A classic English underdog hero.
Love it. Grant Bage, thank you very much. The Unseen Sir Alf, a different kind of hero, is a terrific read. My thanks to Grant and to Foggy, as ever. Previous episodes of the William Hill Sports Book Club are available as podcasts and on the talkSPORT YouTube channel, including the 2025 winner, Pippa York's amazing book, The Escape, which she wrote with David Walsh. Both Pippa and David joined us for that episode. It's well worth checking out. And the book, a worthy winner as well. Thanks for being with us for this episode. We'll see you next time on the William Hill Sports Book Club.